This took place about 2 months ago. Me and a friend of mine were on our way driving home back from a concert. It was late at night, I want to say around 11 p.m. or later. My friend was in the passenger seat and I was driving. We were en route to another friend's house to stay the night and crash out, since him and I had lived a few towns past that, and we had traveled several hundred miles for this concert. Now, on our way back to his friend's house, we had to drive through a multiple amount of roads. Part of it was the freeway, but there were quite a few back roads that we had to take. The one we took, which is when our encounter happened on, didn't have a whole lot of lights. We were driving through on a more semi-rural back road that only had a couple of lights here and there, but none at the area of road we were at. Everything was illuminated pretty well though with my headlights, since I had an '09 Volkswagen Jetta, and the lights in my vehicle were fairly well. We were driving along, listening to music and talking about how great the concert was, when my friend said, "Hey, what's that in the road?" And as he pointed, I looked forward and I saw this big black shape in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it might have been a dead cow because it was rather large, and it was laying right in the middle of the road. There were ditches on both sides of the road, and I don't know if there was quite enough room for me to squeeze around past it. I slowed my car down when this shape started to move as I approached it. It squirmed and moved, and as I came to a full stop, this thing stood up all the way on its 2 feet. My friend and I quite simply shit bricks. This thing looked like a werewolf from behind, and that's when it turned its head and looked right at us. Our headlights were right on this thing, so when it turned around, the eye shine on this thing was immense. It was almost more than an eye shine. It was like an unnatural glow of red and amber. I don't know what else to do to describe it to you. It was more gray and white in color, which I thought was weird, and it looked like a pretty stereotypical werewolf right off of the Hollywood movie screen. It kept its back to us for some weird reason, and just kept its head turned looking right at us. I'm not sure what that was all about, even though its head was only halfway turned to partially look at us. We sat there for about 4 to 5 seconds, and this thing was perfectly still, just staring us down with one eye. Then, out of nowhere, this thing jumps off the side of the road to the right, and off into the darkness. I've never seen an animal leap like that, or leap that far, for that matter. It didn't even seem human, even if we wanted to believe it was somebody out in a costume. But the size alone told us otherwise. Like I said, this thing was massive, and when I first saw it, I thought it was a cow. Since the headlights were on this thing for like 5 seconds or so, I'm only guessing because I'm not really sure. It felt like an eternity, but it was enough time for me to really take in details of this thing. The light allowed us enough visibility to see the clear muscle ripples in its flesh, that this was indeed a living animal, and this thing was extremely lean. You could see the muscle underneath its fur and how shaggy it was, but leaner on some parts like the legs and the chest and the arms. I noticed it didn't have a tail, but was more tapered off at the waist, and its legs were haunched just like a dog, and it kind of hunched over with more of a mane kind of fur on the back. My friend and I just sat there in silence for a few moments once this thing jumped off the road, when he broke the silence with, "What the fuck did we just see?"
I normally don't tell a whole lot of people about this encounter due to ridicule, and I don't want people to think I'm crazy. Besides, who's going to believe me anyway? It's not like there's anybody else I know that has encountered such a weird animal like we did that night. I can tell you though, we did make it back to my other friend's house quite safely after a while, and we never said a word to him of what we experienced. But after that, that was the end of it, nothing more. And my friend and I have not spoken a word of it since, because quite frankly, there's no need to. Okay, this didn't happen to me, but a really close family friend. I went down to go visit this family friend down in Georgia. He lived in Fannin County, and so I went down there about every other year to go visit him during the summertime. We would drink a lot of beer and have good barbecues and just reconnect since we had grown up together and were fairly close. He had started his new life in Georgia with his then wife. He was more of a southern kind of guy anyway. He enjoyed more of the swampy, thick, humid atmosphere than I ever could. I was a more dry heat kind of guy. Give me San Diego, Arizona, or Western Texas, and I'm good. But I can't really do the southern stuff. That was all for him, pretty much. Originally, when he was where I was and he wanted to move down there, I gave him my blessings and wished him well in his career. And then he ended up meeting his wife, and next thing you know, they're married, they have a nice house, and it's a dream for them. But everything wasn't as it seemed. My friend was kind of holding something back, so to speak. When we had sat down and had our barbecue, we had usual chit-chat and small talk, and just talked about life and catching up and how things were going. I asked him about his marriage, his job, and just how life was in general. He pretty much had nothing but good things to say. However, he leaned forward and he says, "Can I trust you with something I need to tell you?" Being a lifelong friend, I told him, "Of course you can." He got really quiet and kind of stirred around his beer a little bit in his hand. I could tell something was wrong. Since I've known him for 20 plus years, I've been able to really pick up on his emotions and when things are wrong, and this was one of them. He was never a scared kind of guy or anything like that. He was pretty tough and pretty crazy, much more crazier than I. This is the type of guy that would be willing to go and grab a rattlesnake by the hands on the back of its neck to decapitate it, or strip bare naked and jump off a 50-foot cliff into a river, no questions asked. So you could understand why I was concerned and listened to what he said closely. He told me he was driving home one night on Highway 2. To the left of him was Jack's River. He said it was pretty dark, and he came around a sharp curve in the road when his headlights illuminated a very large deer in the road. This deer was a doe, and he said he was surprised by how large of a doe it was, but it saw his lights and skittered off quickly to the right. He said he wasn't sure why this doe was just standing in the middle of the road, but it looked like it was spooked by something. He says he slowed down because, as you know, when one deer is around, there's always multiple to follow, so he didn't want to risk hitting a deer and damaging his truck. He said as he slowed down and waited a couple seconds for more deer to come out and follow suit, this wolf thing stepped out into the road, and it looked angry. He wasn't quite sure how to describe this weird animal. He said it looked like a deformed black bear, but was standing up on two legs. He noticed the claws first and foremost, and noticed they were black and curved, and very long, and he noticed it had raccoon-like hands, which he thought was weird. Then he noticed more of the face, and saw it had huge fangs with razor-sharp teeth supporting it. He said this thing looked pissed. He then put two and two together, that whatever this animal was obviously about to pounce on this deer in the middle of the road. Him pulling up to the deer must have spooked the deer, therefore causing this creature to lose its meal. This thing grew more aggressive and violent by the moment, gnashing and baring its teeth and growling lowly. He then proceeds to tell me that out of sheer fear, he slams on the gas to swerve around this creature, and as he does, this animal runs after his car and slashes his back left tire, causing it to go flat immediately. With his back left tire out, he's still trying to gun it as fast as he can while this animal is chasing him in its rear view. He said the weird thing was, even though it attacked his tire and blew out his back left tire, this thing was very easily able to keep up with his truck. It's like it wasn't even trying, he said. It wasn't even like it was breaking a sweat. It was just playing with him, toying with him, and eventually, after some minutes, it disappeared into the brush and the darkness. He said when he pulled up to the house, His tire was in such bad shape, he was freaking the hell out. Obviously, he couldn't tell his wife what had happened because he doesn't know or think that she could handle the real truth of what happened. So he told me that he told her that he had ran over a very sharp rock that totally decimated his back tire. He took a picture of it on his phone and then he showed me the back tire. This thing was shredded. It looked like someone took an elephant knife and just slashed his tire in one clean sweep. The man was literally driving on a bare rim and a slashed tire for God knows how many miles until he got home. I kept asking him, what kind of animal was it? What do you think it was? What did it look like? And he said the closest he could tell me is it just looked like some weird deformed bear, but he said it looked more like a wolf, and it looked like an alpha predator is the exact words he told me. He said whatever this thing was clearly hunting at nighttime, and it was clearly going after that doe that was in the middle of the road. Obviously, he tells me he fucked up by chasing the deer off, because that was this thing's meal ticket. It acted like any aggressive, hungry predator would, but chasing his vehicle and attacking his tire, that is what's crazy to me. This happened on Lake Champlain about 15 years ago. My friend Tom and myself would rent a cabin on the lake every year since we were teenagers. We enjoyed taking the boat out as well and fishing from the tube popular area that was on the lake, and behind a tube led into the backwater and swamp. There was a road that went over tube usually every night in the summer. It was packed with fishermen for fishing with catfish. My friend had to leave suddenly for a family emergency, so I was going to be alone for a few days, and then he was coming back up. That night, I decided to go down to tube and go fishing. It was a nice summer night with a breeze coming off of the lake. As I parked my truck, I noticed that the tube fishing area was completely empty, which was rather surprising because I had actually never seen that before. But it was good news for me because that means I could get the best fishing spot. I set up my 2 poles and got nice and comfortable. Far in the distance, I could see the bridge to New York State and the lights reflecting off the lake. Adding in the nice breeze, it was perfect. I was there for about an hour and no fish were biting. I could hear a howling noise coming from behind me in the backwater swamp area. It was far away, so I thought maybe it was coyotes. As I sat on the bank, I noticed that the howling was steadily getting closer, and it sounded like multiple animals or something like that. Add in the breeze, and it was making howling sound like it was starting to spread out more and more. I still, though, was not really worried, but that changed soon after. I had been hearing these sounds for probably 20 minutes and had no cars being driven down the road since it was pitch black. Just as I thought, it couldn't get any closer or more scary. The howling was noticeably getting louder and louder and heading straight towards me, it seemed. I still did not plan on leaving, but it was getting unsettling. As the noises got much louder and really close, I really feared it was something larger, as these noises were of nothing I had ever heard. It was almost like they were surrounding me, and I would not be able to leave soon if this kept happening. At this point, I said to myself, I don't want to meet whatever is making these howling noises. As it seemed like they were only 50 yards away, I just reeled in the lines and grabbed the tackle boxes and sprinted for my truck. The worst part was where my Tricomatic was parked. Was heading towards the noises. I was running so fast I opened back and threw gear in and jumped in the truck. I took off and hung a sharp right turn away and back towards cabins. I was so unnerved to drive past the cabins and over the bridge to New York after driving 20 minutes. I pulled over in a rest area and stayed there for about an hour until I could drive back to the cabins. I definitely did not sleep well that night, and I'm not sure what I heard, but thankfully, I will never go back there alone ever again. I was in my early 20s when I had finally saved up enough dough to rent a place with a few roommates whom I knew rather closely. I had just started this great job that promised a lot of raises and company growth within. I wasn't making a whole lot at the time since I had just started with this company, but I made enough that allowed me to get into this sweet place that I could never ever afford, of course. I'm talking renting a place with 5 bedrooms, 2 baths, living room, family room, garage, the works. The other 2 dudes living there made great money, so I agreed that I would cover what I could of the rent. As I started to make more money and get raises, I would jump in and cover more. 3 guys in this big house allowed for so much room. It was nice. Did I mention how nice this place was? I wanted to get into this place because it was only a 7-minute commute from where I worked versus the 35-minute drive I had before from my old apartment. You can imagine how excited I was that I got into this place. Not only was it a large house, but it had a huge field that surrounded it on all sides. The previous owner never took good care of it outside, so there was usually a ton of brush and overgrowth, which always made the place look rather scruffy and unkempt. It was winter, though, during this time, and much of the brush and everything else was covered by a couple feet of snow, and there were just trees barely visible. I had moved in the middle of January, and it was a cold winter. It didn't take me long to get comfortable and settle in completely. Getting used to the house was pretty normal, except for what I'm about to tell you about. I had to get up for work early. I got up and got ready to go. It was a pretty normal morning routine. As I'm stepping outside the house, turning around to lock the front door, I noticed something odd to the right of me. Large prints in the snow. I mean large. The weird thing was that these were looking to be dog prints, except they were humongous. The prints followed all the way back towards the back end of the house. Keep in mind, we're in the thick of winter. 2 feet of snow on the ground, and our driveway was a little longer than usual, with quiet neighbors all around us who kept to themselves. I don't even think there was any dogs around here at all. It was a pretty quiet neighborhood. It was lightly snowing, so the prints were about to soon be filled in by snow. I just left it at that, and went to work thinking it was going to be normal. My other 2 roommates worked long shifts too, and wouldn't be home till much later in the evening, way after I got home. I remember getting home that evening when, getting out of my car, I see what looks like fresh prints in the snow of the same tracks I saw early in the morning. I thought to myself that there just must be some loose dog walking around. I decided to follow where they went, which again was behind the other side of the house. I followed it, and they led to the one back bedroom window, and then they led off past into the field. It looked like this animal was standing on 2 legs and looking into the window. What kind of animal does that? The prints literally just stopped at the window, and then it looked like it turned around and walked off past the field into the woods. It really weirded me out. I just went inside though and forgot about it. The bedroom whose prints it was in front of was actually one of my roommates. I think it wasn't until the next day that I mentioned to him that if he noticed that there were weird dog prints outside of his window, and what that was all about. He just looks at me, pale in the face. He pauses, and then tells me he saw some large dog looking into his window the other night. He said it looked like a black German Shepherd. He said it was huge, and that it was growling at him. I didn't believe him, but he didn't talk about it any further. I left the issue at that, thinking he was crazy, and my other roommate didn't know anything about that. Things went on as normal for a while, and I did not see any more tracks, or hear anything, see anything, or sense anything. A few weeks go by, and again, one morning, as I'm getting into my car, about to pull away, I look straight ahead, about to go into reverse, and ahead of me, I see this large dark shape moving around behind the house. I immediately panicked and thought it was someone trying to break in. I started honking my horn over and over in hopes of scaring away this perpetrator. But instead, I see this large head pop around the corner of the house, in which the shape then disappeared. I stopped honking the horn, and all I remember was this large black German Shepherd head with piercing yellow eyes staring me down. The head was pretty high up against the wall too. I would say at least 7 or so feet just from guesstimating. This animal must have been big. I threw the car into reverse, and in fear, I fled the house, not knowing what I was looking at. It was snowy and icy, so I knew that I couldn't fly out of the driveway. But I was fear-ridden and did not know what to do, so I pretty quickly got out the end of the driveway and drove off. I got home again that evening and saw more fresh prints in the snow again. But this time, knowing what I saw this morning, decided to ignore the whole thing and just hoped it would go away. I don't know what I saw earlier in that day, but obviously, this large black dog was a part of living in this house that I would have to get used to, so I just dealt with it. Things seemed to settle down again, and nothing seemed to happen for a while. Spring eventually came, and I actually got a really killer job offer just a few towns away, so I ended up having to move out and move into a new place closer to where I work now. Keep in mind, I never had any other experiences other than what I just relayed to you. It wasn't until about 7 months later and around October that I kept in contact on and off with the guys from the house, and eventually we ended up hanging out next in, I want to say, the month of October, where we chit-chatted and bullshitted for a little while. I asked them if anything more had happened with that house, and if they knew what had become of that black dog thing. I guess the one roommate who nothing had ever happened to him, and he never saw anything, didn't know anything about it, and didn't know what we were talking about. The other one, the one who this thing was looking in their window at him, he was even more terrified to talk about it. Apparently, this thing had stalked him every morning when he was getting up and going to work. It was also waiting for him to get home, as if it sensed him, as if it knew where he was. He said it would watch him from behind the trees, and sometimes it would run after his car as he was leaving the house. He said he was so spooked that he actually ended up moving out a couple months after I did. There was a newer roommate that had come in and replaced him, and this newer roommate and the older roommate had never saw, felt, or experienced anything like me and this other roommate did. Obviously, my other roommate had it worse off than I did, and for whatever reason, this weird dog seemed so drawn to him for whatever reason. Well, the plot thickens even more. Apparently, my other roommate, who this creature was drawn to, had been practicing black magic for the last 5 or 6 years of his life. It sounded more when he told me that he used to practice and hasn't been actively practicing for the last year or two. And when he had moved into this house that I had moved into shortly after, he actually had not been practicing for quite a while. But he still kept a lot of his trinkets and idols that he worshipped from time to time. I don't know anything about spirituality, nor do I claim to, but I think it's freaky that his dark past seems to have drawn in this animal of some sorts. It was 1985, and I was living outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan at the time. I was roughly 13, I think. This was in the winter, so things were freezing cold outside, as it usually gets in the wintertime in Michigan. The house we owned at the time had only one bedroom upstairs, since it was a single-story home, but had a large downstairs basement area with a bedroom. Being a teenager, you bet your sweet ass I took that bedroom. It was roughly early in the AM when I awoke to the sound of my dog growling lowly at something. This never happens ever, so even though at first I didn't think anything of it, I stirred after this went on for a few moments. Maybe somebody was in my room. I turned my head to look at my dog to see what she was growling at, and she was growling at the window, which was just outside of my room. Remember that because this is a basement area, there are no windows really, except for the one main window outside my room, which is higher up on the wall, like most basements do. I believe they're called ceiling windows. Where my head was out of my pillow, my face was just out of sight of the window. But if I sat up, I could clearly see out the window. As I sat up and saw my dog facing the window, I could see what looked to be somebody in an elaborate werewolf costume staring into my window. Except something was wrong. It looked far more real than a costume ever could. It had its mouth open like it was panting. I remember seeing drool glistening in the light and drooping out of its mouth. I saw its tongue and the intensity of its eyes. The way it stared at me and my dog. I must have stared at this thing for a few minutes. I was locked in a trance, in a daze that I feel like I could not break out of. It's like it had a hold on me. I was so terrified, but I couldn't move a muscle. I don't know how else to describe it. It was horrifying. I could see far more details than I ever wanted to because the outside porch light was on in the back, giving light to the much darkened area outside of the window. The detail that haunted me was how large this thing's head was. I mean, it was huge. It was like a large male lion looking into my window. I've never seen a wolf's head bigger than that before. Finally, I was able to scream and ran out of my bed and up the stairs to the house. I awoke my parents and told them what was going on. We all got up and checked the back of the house, and even though the back porch light was on, illuminating the whole area, we didn't see anyone or find anyone. We're in a pretty populated neighborhood, not too far off from downtown. The police were called and they actually had to look out for somebody in a Halloween costume peeping into people's windows. It didn't look like a costume to me though. Maybe at first glance it was. What I saw that night just looked so realistic. I'm sure it wasn't a mask. I looked at it long enough to know that there was something wrong about it, and that it wasn't a person just playing pretend. As the years went on, I began hearing about this whole dogman phenomenon and how Michigan seems to be the mecca for dogmen and that sort of thing. That just spooked me even more, even though there wasn't any snow on the ground at all. It might have just been later on in the fall, but who would be outside early in the morning when it's freezing outside, staring into people's windows for no reason?